Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I know that whenever I talk about the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, or the OCGFC, I know how it sounds, like a conspiracy. But if you think about it in this way, it will hinder any understanding of what I'm actually talking about, because that vastly oversimplifies power dynamics. I settled on the term OCGFC, owners and controllers of global financialized capital, yes, to simplify things, but also to denote as accurately as possible the combined individuals and institutions which constitute private sector power, or what can be alternatively referred to as the empire of capital. This is both a class of people and an assortment of businesses and financial institutions and those who work for them, which together exert enormous influence over government policy and over local, national, and the international economy. Let me first explain why it's necessary to include the adjective financialized with regards to the owners of capital. It's because Elon Musk didn't become that rich by selling Teslas. It's why Elon Musk's net worth went from around 24 billion to 165 billion just in 2020 because of stock options. That's financialization. It's not money that's earned, it's not revenue, it's not the gross or the net profit from any service or product sales. It is virtual money in the financialized money metaverse. It's because of financialization that we have now people who own obscene amounts of wealth that stagger belief and defy explanation. It's money that is not tied to any real world activity. So the people whose wealth is derived from financialization will inherently have different interests than those people whose wealth is derived from traditional real world productive activities. But that's a topic for another time. Now, in this disparate group of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, OCGFC, within this group, we cannot assume that there is unanimity about how their power should be exerted. There are competing interests, there are competing priorities, there are competing theories. Within this group, within the OCGFC, there will be shifting coalitions of shared interests, and those interests may conflict with the interests of other coalitions of private sector power within the OCGFC. And also there will be differences of actual power and influence in any given place or on any given issue. All members of the OCGFC are not equal. We're not talking about a bunch of men in hooded robes in a dark room standing over a glowing map of the world determining the fate of humanity. We're talking about a system of power dynamics globally that skews towards the rich. We're talking about people and institutions who possess tremendous resources and the ability and the desire to consolidate their wealth, power, and control. It does not require a conspiracy for any group of people to utilize their resources to secure their own interests. But we're talking about people and institutions who have considerably more resources at their disposal with which to pursue their own private benefit than what is available to most people. Now, we do have companies like State Street, like Vanguard, like BlackRock, asset management companies managing the vast assets of this class of people. So we can say that through companies like this, there is a degree of coordination, direction, and management of how the power that is derived from those assets, how that power will be wielded. But there will still be individuals and coalitions of individuals and institutions who may not agree with the approach being taken by, say, BlackRock. But BlackRock will be able to overrule them because BlackRock represents a much larger constituency of the owners of capital. And then you have organizations like the IMF and the World Bank whose general purpose is to spread neoliberalism, because there is a general consensus that neoliberalism is good and is of general benefit to their interests. Neoliberalism promotes privatization, the hollowing out of the state, the elevation of the private sector. It facilitates monopolization and syndicates. It creates food insecurity and dependency. And overall, it creates endless opportunities for the biggest multinational corporations to gain control over markets. So there's more or less a universal agreement among the OCGFC that neoliberalism is good. But the enforcement of neoliberalism, however, will vary in its application and its approach from society to society, because neoliberalism imposes disastrous conditions on society, and societies can respond in unpredictable ways. So these society-specific strategies for implementation of neoliberalism will be crafted by think tanks, by PR agencies, by consultancies, and by governments and intelligence agencies. all of whom share the consensus view that neoliberalism is good, and all of whom share the general pursuit of consolidating the wealth and power of the powerful and wealthy. Each component constituent of the OCGFC has its own systemic framework. It has its own internal logic. Billionaires and millionaires have their own logic. Banks have their own logic. Multinational corporations have their own internal logic, so on and so on. And so when each component constituent pursues its own self-interest according to its own logic, unsurprisingly, this looks like orchestration and coordination. But it isn't necessarily coordinated at all. It's actually just groups of people and institutions all pursuing what makes sense according to their internal logic, independent of one another, but naturally coinciding with shared class and institutional interests. Like any empire, the empire of capital is sprawling and only vaguely centralized. You have people and institutions all pursuing maximum profit and power, so they tend to agree on the methods for achieving that. The appearance of orchestration is the natural byproduct of shared interests. No conspiracy required. This is important to understand because we need to know that there is no central, all-powerful organizing committee that runs the world. Such a thing is actually impossible, and that's important for us to understand too, because the plans that develop among the various factions within the OCGFC are seldom, if ever, fully realized. They change, they adapt, they evolve, they fail, and sometimes they are defeated. And this is largely because the most powerful players in any society are actually the people, not the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about a so-called democracy or democratic state or otherwise. The OCGFC are only obsessed with consolidating their power because they are continuously pitted against a much more powerful opponent, an unpredictable, resilient, creative, and ultimately uncontrollable opponent, the population. Control over any population can only ever really be achieved by that population's own compliance and capitulation, which is why so many resources are required just in order to manipulate, deceive, and misdirect public attention. But even with all these resources, the people regularly scupper the best laid plans of the owners and controllers of global financialized capital. I don't doubt, for instance, that the protests in France were infiltrated by security and intelligence agencies in order to radicalize the protesters and in order to incite and stir violence in the protesters, which could then be laid at the feet of Russian backing. But I also do not doubt that no one expected the protesters to target the headquarters of BlackRock. I mean, bear in mind here that the rich and powerful do not and cannot really understand normal people, and neither can intelligence agencies. They are so estranged from normal people that they reliably fail to predict how people will behave or react in any given situation, even if they also often do get that right. No one expected, for instance, that this app, TikTok, would ever be anything more than an instrument for distraction and entertainment. But it has become a vital source of information and alternative news and analysis for hundreds of millions of people. Just as Iblis has such contempt for humanity that he can't predict their morality and righteousness whenever it emerges, so too the contempt of the rich and powerful for the population often leaves them surprised when people prove to not just be idiots who only care about porn and video games. So no, there isn't a central planning committee that controls everything that happens in the world. Not the Rothschilds, not the Jews, not the Illuminati, not the Masons, not the Bilderberg Group, not the Trilateral Commission, not the World Economic Forum. And the goals of the rich and powerful are not by any means inevitabilities. Now, they may be in their minds thinking that they're playing a zero-sum game, and they'll have people like Klaus Schwab assuring them that an ultimate conclusive victory over the population is possible. But it isn't. The struggle between the rulers and the ruled has been going on since time immemorial, and it will continue until the last day. But in that struggle, the most precarious players are the rulers, not the ruled. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum.